So are there any questions from the audience so far? Yes, please. We have one gentleman here in the middle. Maybe if I may ask you, when you ask your question, just to quickly say your name and your company before you ask the question.
Wayne Bramwell, Casbar Resources. This is not a question, it's actually a plug for the IFC. IFC have been involved with Casbar since 2010. We're an Australian listed junior explorer developing a tin project in Morocco. IFC have been on our register since 2010, 15.8% shareholder. And anyone out there who would like to have a junior company's perspective of the IFC's involvement, happy to chat. Thanks, Carsten.
So you brought some fans to the conference today. Any other questions? Yeah, it looks like everyone is longing for the first coffee break. Maybe let me ask one or two questions to Carsten. Carsten, you mentioned regulators and how regulatory environment has to be there in order to enable mining investments. Could you maybe make a very good example and a very bad example of such a regulatory environment in terms of countries?
Well, first of all, I would like to avoid any kind of finger pointing at any particular government. So let me. And this for both directions of the question. But I think we all have to bear in mind that mining is a very capital-intensive industry with very long payback periods. And so what the mining sector, dealing with so many uncertainties, from outright exploration to building the mine and also then to operate it through the commodity price cycle, is already a tremendous challenge. And so what it ultimately requires is actually an environment which is conducive on the one hand side, but then at the same time also very stable over a prolonged period of time. Because if the initial expectations implemented at the time when the investment decision was made could not be supported until the project actually has gone through the most part of its life cycle, then investors will not be able to recover their initial investment. And therefore, there are certain regions in the world that have been attractive not only for geological reasons, but also for very strong investment reasons over a prolonged period of time as the prime destination for exploration dollars and for investment dollars. And other countries that have similar strong commodity and geological potential that have not been able yet to unlock that natural resource. So I think I would like to keep it with that.
And okay, let me put it differently. So what would you recommend any government that wants to foster investment in that sector? What are the two or three key things to provide? You mentioned stability already. What else do you see?
There's certainly also the dimension of the sanctity of contracts and stability of processes, I should say, the clarity of processes of how to obtaining mining licenses, but then also getting through the whole permitting process. We have seen it in several occasions where mining projects that economically and to some degree even financially were looking fairly attractive to be implemented, ultimately could not proceed because there were significant obstacles in these two dimensions.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe one last question, because you also indicated that in your presentation. Why do you think, despite the fact that there are still healthy commodity prices in most areas, why do you think is there such a reluctance for investments? I'm not maybe talking about the mining industry, but also about other financial institutions.
Well, it probably has to do with well, the management of expectations. And the question is, what should a return out of a natural resources project be for the shareholders, for the government, and for the stakeholders overall? And I guess there was probably a little bit of a sentiment that with the commodity price boom, there was much more in terms of net profit out of any mining operations that could be shared amongst the various stakeholders than there was actually on the table. And so with that disappointment, well, investment goes then to other sectors. And also, the question is, well, is a change from 12% to 10% and now 7-ish% in Chinese growth of the economy really so bad as it had been well illustrated then in the commodities world? Well, it is still growing at 7%, and so there will still be incremental demand. It's just that this increment is not as big as it used to be. So I think it has to do with what I was referring to early on. Yes, we are coming for the first time now into a situation where in most commodities we see surpluses occurring, but they will not last for long. And we need to, well, get back to seeing investors that are realistic in terms of their expectation, and that not by investing in any junior company you could easily expect to get 10-fold, 15, 25 times your initial investment, but that you have nonetheless decent returns that are justifying the risks that you are associated with when investing in the mining sector.
So I think there is another question back there.
Yes. Hi, this is Iman Rohani from Trimex, and I have a question from Mr. Alapor. You explained that the demand and the growth for the commodity markets in the future to rise, and as this being correct, what sort of suggestion do you have for companies in order to fill the gap and support that raise in demand in terms of machinery, equipment, and transportation, as these three factors are extremely important to support that rise in demand?
I guess really it will really depend, of course. I mean, if you are really in the business of say, the so-called supplies to the mining contractors and so forth, of course, it will all depend on the rise of the whole commodity value and prices, and which will drive investment into the sector and activity into the mining company and the whole industry. So, of course, you are really almost, you are held back only because of the industry. So I wouldn't be able really to help suggest any way out. But I'm sure, there are certain countries that are possibly more active than other countries in your business, but I thought you would probably ask me to say that while the sector is really saying values are not up yet, and maybe things really are still slow, what will a mining company do? And in case if anybody wants to ask that question, I would say that I think it's a great opportunity now to really look at a lot of junior mining companies who have done a lot of exploration work. Some of them are short of funding. Some of them they need support, either funding and of course different level of funding. So to invest in the sector through junior miners who have done a lot of work but they need support is critical. But I think in your business where you really depend on how active the sector is, I think you are still hostage of how well and when will the sector move up. Of course, we've learned one thing from the real estate business is that people like you with a lot of equipment, and I hope I understand your question well, is that there are times when they basically have to pack and move across where there are activities in the sector. Of course, the mining sector is pretty global, so you can't say that, mining activity, if I move equipment from Guinea across to DRC, it will work. It's most probably all the same. But I know in the real estate business, funny enough, last week I was in Abuja, Nigeria, and then I meet a gentleman from Abu Dhabi, a Lebanese gentleman. They're very, very brave people. And he just told me that he basically moved half of his equipment to Abuja because there was a slowdown 3 years ago in Dubai, and his cranes and all his equipment are not working. So Abuja's busy, and he said, I moved there and I started from scratch, and I struggled for a few years to know my way around. But I think in your industry, you're really surrounded by the whole environment.
Thank you.
So we would have time for one last question, if there's one last question. The gentleman over here. Could you just...
Ali Al-Amri from Saudi Comidat from Saudi Arabia. My question for Mr. Carson from IFC. I have seen one of your slides that IFC has invested around 12% in MENA region. What are these countries, and what is your IFC forecast for the 10 years, next 10 years? Are going to be up or down? Thank you.
Sorry, if you could kindly just specify what kind of forecast for 10 years I'm expected to make.
For your investment, is going to be in the MENA region, is going to be up or down?
No, well, in general terms, well, we would want to continue investing more in the MENA region. It, however, largely depends on which are the mining prospects that will be discovered and developed. Let me also remind, and I should have probably mentioned that earlier on in answering one of the earlier questions, let's not forget that the exploration phase on average for any given mine takes anywhere between 8 to 10 years. And this is disregarding any kind of commodity cycle developments. So there's a prolonged phase which is requiring to do substantial work in order to delineate the next generation of assets. I currently do not see that very same strengths of exploration activities in the MENA region than I see it in some other parts of the world. And this is more driven by, and this may not be accurate, but it's mostly driven by when you just observe on where the exploration dollars are currently flowing to. And interestingly, it's, for instance, also not East Asia Pacific. Yeah, so it continues to be, most exploration dollars are continuing to be spent, if we let aside Australia and Canada and the US, it's mostly Sub-Saharan Africa, and it is mostly Latin America. So from our perspective, we would want to do more. So please, if you have any iron ore, any copper, gold, lead or zinc or any other type of commodities, phosphates, and so forth, that private sector companies would want to develop in MENA, here I am. Please contact me.
Okay, so I think many will do. I think from my experience, it is not very often let's say many private sector companies don't think about IFC. So maybe this also encourages you of thinking about it. And I liked also Mr. Alabar's statement on probably when prices are low and situations are more difficult, then it's the time to invest. And you have to struggle in the beginning, but you can only be successful if you start considering these investments in such times. Excellencies, Mr. Fürster, thank you very much.